In the quiet town of Elm Hollow, nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, peace was a way of life. Neighbors knew each other by name, children played in the parks without worry, and the passage of seasons was marked by community gatherings. But that peace was shattered one cold autumn evening when the remains of a young woman, Sophie Archer, were discovered deep within the shadowy thickets of Briarwood Forest. Sophie had been missing for a week. Her last known appearance had been at the town's Grand Autumn Masquerade, an annual event that celebrated the harvest season. It was the highlight of the year, with townsfolk donning elaborate costumes, the streets lined with jack-o'-lanterns, and the central square filled with laughter and music. But amidst the revelry, Sophie had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the eerie silence of the night. Her costume, an intricate gown designed to resemble autumn leaves and forest vines, had taken her weeks to create. The last time her friends had seen her, she was glowing with excitement, determined to win the costume contest. But now, that beautiful creation was a haunting symbol of her brutal fate. Detective Rachel Hayes was the first to arrive at the scene. She had lived in Elm Hollow her entire life, and the discovery of Sophie's remains shook her to the core. Sophie wasn't just another missing person. She was someone Rachel had known since childhood. The small-town detective had handled her share of cases, but nothing like this. The brutal nature of the crime felt foreign, out of place in the sleepy town she had always called home. And as she stood there, looking down at what was left of Sophie, she couldn't help but wonder if the town would ever be the same again. Rachel was no stranger to difficult investigations, but this case felt different. It wasn't just the horror of the murder. It was something deeper, something darker that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Elm Hollow had its share of secrets, but nothing like this. As she began to gather evidence, it became clear that Sophie's death wasn't a random act of violence. The clues pointed to something more personal, more calculated. Sophie's friends, Emma, Liam, and Sarah, were devastated. They had all attended the Autumn Masquerade together, and the guilt weighed heavily on their hearts. Emma, Sophie's best friend since grade school, had been the last to see her that night. They had been laughing, joking about the cheesy costumes some of the partygoers were wearing. But at some point, amidst the music and dancing, they had lost track of each other. Emma had assumed Sophie had left with someone she knew, or maybe she had just wandered off to get some air. It wasn't unusual for Sophie to need a break from the crowd. Sarah, always the cautious one, remembered warning Sophie earlier in the evening. "Don't go into the woods alone," she had said, half joking, as they walked toward the bonfire that had been lit at the edge of Briarwood Forest. Sophie had laughed it off, saying she wasn't afraid of few shadows. But now, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been more insistent. If only she had stayed closer, if only they hadn't let her wander off. Liam, quiet and thoughtful, had kept his distance at the party. He wasn't one for big crowds, and he had spent most of the evening by the bonfire, watching the flames dance against the night sky. He hadn't noticed Sophie leave, but now he regretted not paying more attention. The what-ifs played over and over in his mind, and the guilt gnawed at him like a wound that wouldn't heal. The town was in shock. Elm Hollow was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where doors were left unlocked, and children rode their bikes through the streets without fear. But now, a dark cloud had settled over the town, and no one knew who to trust. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said it had been a drifter, someone passing through town. Others whispered about an old legend, a curse that was said to haunt the Briarwood Forest. But Rachel didn't believe in legends or curses. She believed in evidence, and right now, there wasn't enough of it. The investigation started with the usual suspects, those who had attended the party, friends, acquaintances, anyone who had been in contact with Sophie in the days leading up to her disappearance. But each interview led to more dead ends. Witnesses claimed to have seen Sophie throughout the evening, mingling with the crowd, but no one could remember who she had been with when she left. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Then there was Daniel Rooker, a name that kept coming up in conversations. He was a relative newcomer to Elm Hollow, having moved into the old manor on the outskirts of town just a few months ago. The manor had a dark history, rumors of hauntings, mysterious deaths, and strange happenings. But Daniel dismissed the stories as small-town gossip. Still, his arrival had sparked curiosity, and now, with Sophie's death, suspicion. Rachel knew she had to question Daniel. He had been at the Autumn Masquerade, and his name kept surfacing in the most unexpected places. When she visited him at his home, he seemed nervous, evasive. He admitted that he had attended the party, but claimed he had left early, feeling out of place among the revelers. But when Rachel pressed him about why Sophie's blood had been found on the edge of his property, his story began to unravel. Daniel's alibi was shaky at best. He insisted that he had nothing to do with Sophie's death, but there was something about his demeanor that made Rachel uneasy. He was hiding something, she was sure of it, but without more concrete evidence, she couldn't make an arrest. So, she continued to dig, hoping that one of the many pieces of the puzzle would finally fall into place. Meanwhile, Sophie's parents, Beth and James Archer, were inconsolable. They had always been protective of their daughter, their only child, and the thought that something so terrible could happen to her in their own hometown was unimaginable. Beth had always worried about Sophie's free spirit, her tendency to trust people too easily, but she had never imagined that her worst fears would come true. James, a stoic man who rarely showed his emotions, was a shell of himself. He spent hours at the police station, demanding answers that no one could give. The days turned into weeks, and the investigation seemed to stall. Rachel felt the weight of the case pressing down on her. The town was growing restless, and the fear that had taken hold was palpable. People began locking their doors at night, something that hadn't been done in years. Parents kept a closer eye on their children, and the once bustling town square was now eerily quiet. As Rachel combed through the evidence once again, she began to notice a pattern, a series of seemingly unrelated events that, when connected, painted a chilling picture. Sophie had been looking into something that had to do with the history of Elm Hollow. She had mentioned it to Emma a few weeks before the party, saying she had uncovered something big. At the time, Emma hadn't thought much of it, assuming it was just another one of Sophie's wild ideas. But now it seemed important. Rachel dug deeper into Sophie's life, talking to people who had known her well. She discovered that Sophie had been researching the history of Briarwood Forest and the old manor that Daniel had moved into. There were stories of disappearances, strange sightings, and even deaths that had occurred over the years, all centered around the manor and the forest. Sophie had been fascinated by the tales, and it seemed she had uncovered something that someone didn't want her to know. As Rachel pieced together the clues, she realized that Sophie's death wasn't just a random act of violence. It was connected to the town's dark past. Someone had killed Sophie to keep the secrets of Elm Hollow buried. But who? And why now after all these years? The breakthrough came one cold November evening, when a witness came forward with a crucial piece of information. A local farmer who lived near the edge of Briarwood Forest had seen something strange the night Sophie disappeared. He had been out in his field, checking on his livestock, when he saw a figure moving through the woods, dragging something behind them. At the time, he had thought it was just one of the many festival-goers stumbling home after a night of drinking. But now, with the discovery of Sophie's body, he realized it had been something far more sinister. Rachel followed the lead, and it brought her back to Daniel Rooker. His story about leaving the party early didn't hold up under scrutiny. And when the police searched his property again, they found a hidden room in the basement of the old manor, a room filled with newspaper clippings, maps of the forest, and journals detailing the history of Elm Hollow. It was clear that Daniel had been obsessed with the town's past, and in particular, the strange events that had occurred around Briarwood Forest. But there was more to the story than just an interest in history. As Rachel read through the journals, she discovered that Daniel had been part of a group, an underground society that had existed in Elm Hollow for decades. Their purpose? To protect the town's secrets, no matter the cost. Sophie had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have, and Daniel had been tasked with making sure she never revealed what she had found. But it wasn't just Daniel. There were others involved, people who had been living in Elm Hollow for years, hiding in plain sight. With this new information, Rachel knew she had to act fast. She confronted Daniel, who finally confessed to being part of the society, but insisted that he hadn't killed Sophie. He claimed that it had been an accident, that Sophie had come to his house that night to confront him about what she had found, and in the struggle, she had fallen and hit her head. Panicked, he had taken her body to the forest, hoping that the elements would cover up what had happened. But Rachel wasn't convinced. There were too many inconsistencies in Daniel's story, and the involvement of the secret society suggested that Sophie's death had been planned, not accidental. As she continued to dig, she uncovered the names of the other members of the society, prominent figures in the town, people she had known her entire life. The truth was more horrifying than she had ever imagined. Sophie hadn't just been killed to keep a secret. She had been sacrificed, part of an ancient ritual that the society believed would protect Elm Hollow from the dark forces that supposedly haunted Briarwood Forest. With the help of a few trusted colleagues, Rachel was able to bring the members of the society to justice. The town was left reeling from the revelations, and the once peaceful community was forever changed.